I'm Spencer Mazyck, and joining me now is lawyer turned filmmaker Dawn Porter. Her new HBO documentary, Gideon's Army, follows a group of young public defenders in the Deep South who contend with low pay, long hours, and staggering caseloads to represent the poor. The film premiered at this year's Sundance Film Festival. Welcome, Dawn. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So I want to begin with the film's title, Gideon's Army. Does it come from the landmark 1963 Supreme Court case, Gideon versus Wainwright, which is one that we've all studied in law school?
This is why it's nice to talk to lawyers. So usually people ask me, what's with the title? And yes, it is paying homage to that landmark Supreme Court case. Clarence Earl Gideon did us all a great service by writing a letter from his jail cell, and the lawyers who are public defenders, who have the privilege of being public defenders, are there because he wrote that letter. So that's where the title comes from.
Well, and March 18th marks 50 years since the case was decided. And would you say that the spirit of the ruling is effectively being carried out today?
I don't think it is, which is one of the reasons I made the film. I'm a lawyer, but at the time I was working at A&E Television, and I met Jonathan Rapping, who is a really charismatic, wonderful, super lawyer, defense lawyer, and what he's doing is training young public defenders in the Deep South because there's not a lot of training for them. And what his program is doing is addressing all the deficiencies. You know, the Gideon decision was one of the high marks of jurisprudence, but the promise of that decision has not been fulfilled.
When I was going to say, how effective can representation be whenever the average caseload for any one public defender, for example, in Miami-Dade County, is 500 felonies, 225 misdemeanors? That's a total of 725 cases, which is a staggering statistic from the film.
It is a staggering statistic, and what's important to think about is those are all simultaneous. You're representing all of those individual people at the same time. So, and that is not Miami-Dade is particularly egregious, but across the country we have a crisis in indigent defense where young lawyers, where any lawyers are, and if you're a public defender, you can't say no.
Right.
We have the highest arrest record rate in the world. 13 million people will be arrested every year in America. So millions of new cases are coming into the system, and most of those cases are going to public defenders.
Well, I know at least 3 public defenders who are doing their best with the heavy caseload and also with a very limited resources, and you decided to follow them in this film. Can you tell us about those individuals?
So I met, I was probably a lawyer like many of your viewers. I worked for Baker and Hostetler. I worked at a firm in Washington, D.C. I had really nice pens. I had a really nice office. But I was not in court every day. I was not in kind of the real nitty-gritty of the criminal justice system. And so I went to Alabama and I met these 3 young lawyers, and I was just blown away by their passion and commitment. And so I asked them if I could follow them at home, and then it turned out to be at home, at work, with their girlfriends, with their boyfriends, and they let me, and that's how the film came to be.
Why did you decide to focus on just a small handful of their cases, though?
I really wanted to show the experience of a public defender, and really wanted to show the other side. When in the media, what our experience as viewers of the criminal justice system is usually through the eyes of the prosecution or a corrupt defense attorney who's, doing heavy tricks. It's not through the idea. Public defenders see themselves as people who are civil rights lawyers. They are protecting the least powerful people in our society. And so I wanted to go deep with them into their emotional experience of representing somebody, of having somebody else's life literally in your hands.
The film does a great job of that, I have to say.
Thank you.
Well, and what do you think the film also says about the current state of the criminal justice system?
I think that we are not living up to the potential of the great potential that we have in this country. And I think we're not living up to the ideals that we would like to promote throughout the world. There's nothing inherently wrong with the design of our system. It just was not meant to accommodate millions and millions of people being arrested, often for really minor crimes. And so as more of these cases come through the system, it's just strained to a breaking point. And so what you're seeing across the country are improper convictions, over huge caseloads and people getting burned out and not doing a good and effective job. And we can definitely do better than that.
I also think the film does a great job of clearing up this misconception that the folks who become public defenders, that they aren't the best and the brightest. I'm
so glad that you picked up on that, because I think in the course of making it, I realized some of my own biases. I went to Georgetown and then I went to a firm. That's a really small, narrow world of lawyering. And what these young people who are going to law schools in the South, they are some of the finest lawyers I've ever met.
Absolutely.
And they're skilled, they're smart, but they're also compassionate. And I think showing, kind of their experience, I hope will also be illuminating for other lawyers.
Yeah, I would trust them with any case that I had for myself or even my loved ones.
I say all the time, if I'm in trouble, I'm going to call Travis. And, I have called Travis. I'm not in trouble.
Okay, good. Good to hear that. Well, I want to talk about your transition from law to film. But before we do that, can you at least just tell me what type of work did you handle at the firm when you were at Baker Hostetler?
So I was a civil litigator. We represented newspapers. I did employment law, and I was a pretty happy associate. I wasn't a miserable grinding away in the basement just doing document review. And so I had great mentors. I had very unlikely mentors. And I actually enjoyed the practice of law, but I wouldn't say I really wanted to be in court more. And, civil litigation, your object is not to go to court.
Not to get into court.
And I was not a criminal lawyer. I was not interested in indigent defense or really even prosecution. So I didn't see a lot of paths forward that were going to, really kind of be fulfilling.
Did going to ABC television networks, though, did that get you into court more?
Well, that was closer. No, while I was at Baker & Hostetler has a really fine media practice. And so I had the opportunity to work on a handful of media cases. And that was really, I'd always done journalism. I was really interested in that. So when I got the opportunity, the lawyer's dream, right? You go in-house.
Right, exactly.
So I went in-house to ABC News. And so that was great. It was much more working with clients all the time, problem solving. So not court so much, but a lot of problem solving and a lot of hands-on creativity. So that was fun. That was better.
Good. And so then you went on from there to standards and practices for ABC News and A&E networks. Yes. I think you alluded to that earlier, but when did you decide that you wanted to create films?
So at both ABC News and at A&E, my job was network standards and practices, which really means you read scripts, you work with producers, and it's not as much a legal review as an ethics and standards review. Are we being fair? Are we being accurate? Does the whole piece that we're putting on accurately reflect whatever story we're trying to tell? And I loved that. I loved watching really fine producers take a morass of facts and make them comprehensible. So, but I did that for 12 years.
Yeah, that's a long time.
That's a long time. So it became, a joke. I would start, because you watch, my husband would always say, you watch TV for a living. I'm like, I don't just watch TV. I make TV. No, I watch TV, read scripts. So I started to see what made a good story. And then I really thought there are stories that I am interested in that I would like to tell. And so that was really the impetus behind trying to make my own film.
Because you were already in TV, though, did you find that it was easier to make that transition to becoming a film producer and director?
It was easier in that it wasn't so mysterious, but it was very, very hard. I was at a fairly high level in both companies. I was a vice president at A&E Networks. So to go from a nice office with an assistant to, and lawyers will know what I mean. There's a supply closet at corporations. There's no supply closet at Trilogy Films, and I had to do every single thing by myself. I had to figure it all out. So it was really scary. But when I figured it out, it was really, and then I realized there is no rule book for how to do this, how to make a film. Just you want to do, and if you want to do something badly enough, you figure it out. It's like what you tell your kids. You want to do it badly enough, figure it out. So
and obviously you must have had some growing pains then.
Yeah. Oh yeah, you only don't get proper audio once. You don't make that mistake twice. So, and so I made a lot of mistakes. One thing I think being a lawyer does is you're pretty good at making a plan and executing against a plan. So I hired some really good people where I had budget to do that, and that was very helpful. But at one point I realized they were all looking at me to say when to do something, and sometimes you feel ridiculous. But then you kind of, and then for me, it really was I believe so strongly in the need to tell this story that I could overcome my own insecurities and fears and look foolish sometimes or be embarrassed sometimes, because it wasn't about me and how I looked. It was about making sure I could get this story out and do a good job with it.
So do you want to continue making films like Gideon's Army, or what do you hope to accomplish as a filmmaker?
This is what I do now. So I am currently working on a film about the civil rights movement for PBS, and it's about spies and some African-American spies who spied for the white supremacists.
Wow, that sounds fascinating.
It is fascinating, and people don't know about it. So I'm very interested in kind of getting a new look at stories we think we might know. So with Gideon's Army, it was, you think you know about the criminal justice system, but
do you really?
But do you really? And here's another perspective that may add to what you know. So with Spies of Mississippi, we've become really interested in there's Martin Luther King, and then there was the Voting Rights Act, and then we're fine. And
right,
exactly. It was a little more complicated than that. And so, that's a similar approach. But there's so many interesting things in the world. I mean, my husband's it's a sickness. He's like, you look at that, you're like, I'm gonna make a documentary.
That's great, but you always have this curiosity, which I think makes the best films.
I think so, and I think being a lawyer, I was a good interviewer. I think I like to listen. I like people. I like talking to people, and people can tell that. So there's so much of my legal training that I drew on in being a documentary filmmaker. And I can write a budget. I can write a proposal, and I can meet a deadline. And not cut corners in a way. I think also being a standards and practices person is very important to me, that I be fair to people. So in Gideon's Army, it is not, my goal was not to make prosecutors or judges look bad. It was to say, from the perspective of these 3 young people and their mentor, what is their day like and what happens to them? And I think people have responded to that because there's a lot of noise and conflict in our media today, and this is not that. That's not my objective.
And I'm curious, how long did it take to make Gideon's Army?
To make it was about 3.5 years.
Wow, that's a long period of time then, yeah.
Yeah, it's a long time.
And you expect it to be released on HBO this summer then?
It'll be released on HBO during their summer series, which I'm incredibly proud of. HBO has been such a wonderful partner. They bought the film after seeing 20 minutes of footage, and they have believed not only in the film as a film, but also in the cause. And so they've been really supportive throughout the rollout at the film festivals and beyond.
Well, it's a fantastic film, and I want to say thank you for joining us. We can't wait until your next project comes out. That sounds fascinating,
Stay tuned.
Absolutely will. Thanks, Dawn, for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
For more information on this or other topics, subscribe to BloombergLaw.com. You can follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Thank you for joining us. Bye, everybody.